The reason that your scissors do this instead of cutting through the plastic is not because they're not sharp enough. To design our perfect pair of scissors, we first had to diagnose what was wrong with these. With a box cutter, sharpness is basically the only thing that matters. On a microscopic level, this blade is acting as a wedge, forcing itself into the material and wedging it apart. That was a very clean cut. But scissors do not slice, scissors shear. Instead of a wedge, it's forcing the material into two separate directions. We're not slicing here, we're gonna be shearing. Shearing does not rely nearly as much on how sharp this top and bottom cutting surface are. It's much more about keeping this top bar and the bottom bar perfectly in plane. And so as they're closing, the paper has nowhere to go, so it has to rip. Most plastic handled scissors have sheet metal blades, all of this wiggle room. Instead of them staying in plane and shearing the plastic, they spread apart, trap the material perpendicular to where you're trying to cut. And that sucks. That's the most annoying thing. But there's an alternative construction of scissors that might help us out here. Follow me to the wall of references. Before 1967, which is the first year that plastic handled scissors were introduced, all scissors were made from an all metal construction. The all-metal scissors solve the functional deficiencies from the plastic-handled scissors. They have this wider spine that keeps them more rigidly in plane. They're less prone to bending outward, meaning that these can cut plastic. But I have my own frustrations with the all-metal scissors. There's either the really sterile medical-looking scissors, and then there's dark, overbuilt, industrial tool-looking scissors, and neither of them feel at home in a general household environment. Really what we want, the approachable, fun household scissors, but I want them to be as functional and honestly kind of as badass of a tool as possible. These are not all bad. There's actually some great things in a lot of these samples, and these are not all good. And so we wanted to create something that felt in the middle and felt like the exact pair that we wanted for ourselves. While I'm leading you through the design process of our perfect pair of scissors, I'm also tasking the design team to create the perfect stand to house my new pair of scissors that I'm going to show you guys at the end. So we'll see what the design team comes up with. I bet it's going to be weird. The next step in the design process is almost always identifying what are the best references, the best samples that we can be referring back to throughout the design process. We're going to lay this all out, and we're going to quickly filter out the things that we do like and the things that we don't like. The first thing we considered was overall shape. You know, there's some that have this offset body. Great for when you're cutting fabric along a table, not general purpose. We don't want to do offset scissors. The next thing we considered was size. You want to have that extra purchase, that extra grip that this style of handle and this overall size provide. I love some of these smaller light duty scissors, but they're not what we're gonna do, so I'm gonna remove these. We did lay out some of these plastic handled scissors, which is not the construction that we're gonna use, but there were details about a lot of them that we really love. Some of them have this very kind of soft and organic shaping. Some of them feel really playful and beautiful. Yeah, they're just fun. There is like an emotional aspect of it, at least for me. I was looking at some of these old scissors and I was having these kind of flashbacks. Using a pair of scissors as a kid was a critical moment in becoming a person who makes other things. Let that be the like asterisk throughout all of it. Hunter is a person with personal experiences that inform all of his designs. This is the constellation of references that we used when we were creating the Chroma scissors. It led us to the next phase of the process, which is creating our own form.
We'll do this side first.
Before we got to this, which was the final profile of the Chroma scissors, we started with a very wide exploration of two-dimensional silhouettes. We broke it into two main areas. The first was the handle. We converged on two main directions, a very geometric, clean, modern design, and the other direction was a much more traditional, organic form that felt a lot more familiar. Ultimately decided that it was important that we hew pretty closely to the more traditional handle shape. And if you look closely, you can tell that there's probably 15 or 20% of the more geometric DNA that's been imbued in it. The next piece that we had to explore was, you're doing great, crushing it, was the blade. symmetric scissor blade or an asymmetric one. And you see this kind of asymmetry, particularly with scissors that are intended to cut fabric or leather or something across a table surface in which the lower blade is skinnier and tapered. And then you see this kind of symmetric blade shape with more general purpose scissors, more applicable and useful in different orientations, and often have a bit more rounded of a tip that feels a little bit less dangerous. Ultimately, we went with this symmetric blade. Now that we've established the silhouette of the blade and of the handles, we can bring them together to the final shape of our chroma scissors. Nice. Using this silhouette, there's a few more weeks of sculpting and 3D modeling work from the design team. The main challenge was working with these forms that were much more organic than anything we'd really worked on before, making sure that they fit really well in your hands, and also had this smooth and graceful transition into the more geometric blade side of the scissors. And we end up with this. This is what the scissors look like in the production line at the factory before they grind in the blade, add the hardware, do a host of other processes. You can see there's some important details missing still. Instead of referencing one of the existing scissor samples that we've been looking at, looked back to a previous product that had a lot of similarities that we'd already designed, which is the Brook knife. Let's go to the top-down rig to talk about this part of the design process. You ready? Yes. Okay, so there's two details that we don't like on basically all of the scissor references that we collected. The first, this sharp line. The reason that that line exists is because of the grinding process. Whenever you're grinding that bevel of the blade, you get to this endpoint and you basically pull the blade off and it leaves this hard shoulder. But we did see one sample that had this smooth arc transition. It looked familiar to us because this is a similar technique we had used for our rook knife blade. That's the detail that we borrowed, and it takes a little bit more time to grind that transition, but we felt like it was really important and improvement was worth it. The second detail that we just didn't like, if you look at most scissors, it's essentially a screw that plunges through an unthreaded hole on the top and then screws into a threaded hole on the bottom blade of your scissors. Depending on how strong your threads are, has the potential over time to unscrew and loosen your scissors. If you take apart our rook knife, you see that it's not just a screw, but it's actually a custom sex bolt, and a sex bolt consists of a screw and a post. The design of this custom sex bolt and how it interacts with the main scissors themselves prevents any accidental unthreading of the screw. Other added benefit, I think it's beautiful. Grinding solved, pivot hardware solved. We have now arrived at a very functional and beautiful pair of all-metal scissors. If you look at a distance, they look very similar to the scissors that you'd find in your grandfather's toolbox. But if you look up close, you start to see all of these details that we've been talking about that make it feel a little bit more modern, a little bit more approachable, and a little bit closer to the pair of scissors that we set out to create from the very beginning. But there's one very important final step that is gonna finish turning these into the scissors that we want to use every single day. But before we get into that final critical step of the design process, let's check in with the design team and see how those scissor stands are coming along.
So we've got this guy. It's a little bit more puzzle piecey than the other ones, but I think once you see how it works, you're gonna really like it.
Hello. We kicked Hunter out of his office to install the secret pivoting door.
It seems like it's going well. Nice, but we'll find out. These were the first samples that we made from the factory. The initial excitement was kind of quickly tempered by it feeling a little bit cold and sterile and not like an object that I wanted to have on my desk. How do we address that and not do it in a purely decorative, purposeless way? If you look at our Metrolog ruler, you see that this series of pips feels like a nice decorative pattern, but really its purpose is to provide texture that you can grip onto as you're sliding the caliper head open and closed. So we were looking for that same decorative and functional unlock for our chroma scissors, and at some point during this process, we were reintroduced to vinyl dipping, which is a bit more of an industrial version of plasti dipping. This was a method that adds some functional improvements. It adds a little more grip, it adds a little bit more surface area for comfort, and it adds some beauty. These kind of like awesome coated yellow handles. At the time, the factory only had red, blue, and yellow available as stock vinyl dip colors. We tried some increasingly kind of bold uses and applications of that color until we arrived at maybe the boldest composition, which was the primary colorway. I loved it, and I think the team here mostly loved it, but it did feel like a big risk. It felt kind of insane. I'm pretty sure that it was my co-founder, Zach. He was like, fuck it, let's just go with the primary colorway. And so we went for it, and that's what we launched. And I'm honestly so happy that we did. Not only can they cut through leather, blister packs, and any kind of heavy duty material, but they also look delightful. And that is what we were trying to accomplish. Having this badass, super functional, heavy duty pair of scissors, but make them a beautiful addition to our workspaces and to our lives. When we decided to introduce some additional colorways, we realized that this specific brand of weirdness was not everyone's cup of tea. And so if this was not your cup of tea, don't worry, because we have brewed some additional cups of tea that are weird in different ways that may be for you. So let's take a look at some of those with our friend Kevin. The first we have is our blue with the cream vinyl handle. It feels like a spiritual successor in some ways to the primary. I could see this in a kitchen. I could see this in an entryway. I could see it out. I could see it being carried on a belt. So this is the next color, which is the black with the one yellow dip. Potentially more universally palatable. We see a lot of customer photos of the scissors in a workshop, hanging on a pegboard or in a toolbox or something. I mean, I'm just admiring this. I'm like so impressed with this stand.
And the third colorway, which might be your favorite, is hidden in your office in the third stand.
That was exactly what I wanted. Wow. I really did not know. Ooh, these are like weird sexual noises. You can't use this audio. I'm so sorry. I'm having a physical reaction. I'm satisfied. This sounds bad. I need to figure out, like, yeah. No, you've satisfied me, Kevin. Thank you. Oh, God. Can't use any of this.
I live to satisfy.
No.